So it's just this button right here, and it's on her back, so she can't reach it and see. So as she comes up, could you unmute her, her lav mic for me?
Does she know that's going to happen?
She was going to, Theo was going to do it, but we'll tell her.
Okay. Great. Let's do it. All right. If the last of you will take seats, I think we're a packed house. This is wonderful. There are some seats down here in the center if anyone from the aisles wants to come on in, and down at the edges. You should feel empowered to do that. Justin, Jordy, come on. You know you want to come down front. Okay, sorry. I am so happy to be here today with all of you in this crowded room. Not only because you're smart enough to be with us as we learn from my brilliant friend, DEANNA VAN BUREN, who I'm just really excited and honored to have in the house. And I'll introduce her in just a moment, but I'm also really excited about another thing that's happening here. So I think the most important advocates for design justice in Charlottesville are actually here tonight. Miss Audrey and Miss Joy are in the back. Will you just wave? Because the other thing that we are celebrating, besides Deanna's work, which we will enmesh ourselves in for the next hour, is a program that was really special where we got to partner with the Public Housing Association of Residents and 7 really brilliant young designers, a few of which are here tonight, on a program where these young designers are living here in Charlottesville. They're all of high school age. They were paid for their time to really work with Miss Audrey on a vision that she had to reuse an ash tree, a beautiful multi-hundred-year-old ash tree that needed to be taken down and transform a space on the South First Street Pollux Branch waterway into a space for rest and art and play. So for 2 weeks, the 7 young designers partnered with Professor Elgin Cleckley, Gina Ripple, and then several of our amazing student leaders that are also in the house, and myself, to try to implement this, a design for this vision. And actually, within 2 weeks, they not only traveled around the region and up to DC to see many beautiful designers work, but they also designed 3 different spaces that they're still working with Miss Audrey and Professor Ripple, who's coming down the stairs. Come on in. To transform that ash tree into parts of the design that will be fabricated in the spring. Their work is out in the hallway, so we will have a reception right after that really honors and celebrates that work that I think is pretty phenomenal in a 2-week time. But I would like everybody that was involved with that project to stand up and be honored, please. Thank you. Our faculty director was Elgin Cleckley, and it was just an absolute joy to watch, as he called himself, Black Coach Taylor, provide energy and positivity and keep the excellent creativity flowing from this group of young people. It was just a real, a complete honor for me to be a part of, and so it's really exciting to be able to celebrate that today with you all. I want to now turn, though, to someone who I think is worthy of honoring and celebration with this work, because her work is impactful on not only a local scale but also a national and global one. DEANNA Van Buren is one of the nation's leaders researching, formulating, and advocating for restorative justice centers, which is a radical transformation of the criminal justice system, and you'll hear more about it in her talk today. She's not only the design director, but the executive director of Designing Justice and Designing Spaces, which is an architecture and real estate development firm innovating in the built environment to end mass incarceration. She has been working for over 16 years in some of the nation's top firms doing urban design, domestic, institutional, and educational projects really across the globe. But her recent work and her practice includes Restore, a multi-use hub for restorative justice and restorative economics. The Pop-Up Village, which is a mobile site activation tool, and many other really spectacular projects that I hope we get to hear about tonight. She's also the recent awardee of the Berkeley Rep Professorship Prize, the Royal Society of Arts Bicentenary Medal, and the Women in Architecture Awards honoring pioneering professionals. So the radical way that she's doing this work is being really honored by not only the profession, but by people well outside of it as well. Deanna received her bachelor's in science in architecture from UVA, her master's of architecture from Columbia University, and is also an alumnus of the Loeb Fellowship at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. But what is most spectacular out of all of those accolades is her approach to really taking design as one of the tools in her toolkit to address the root causes of mass incarceration instead of just designing better prisons or another type of structural Band-Aid. My hope for the field is that we, all of these fields, is that we learn from her interdisciplinary approach, not only to deploy joy and hope and creativity, but also to deploy peace in the breakdown of structural injustice. And I'm so grateful you're here.
Push my button. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. I really, really want to thank Barbara for reaching out to me to tell me that Dean Berman was inviting me along with the students here and the whole committee to come and speak to you. I really appreciate the invitation. I also want to thank the law school who also supported me coming here, the Batten School, who I feel like I met all of them today, who also, which was a surprise. I was like, oh, just a few students. Oh, 100 and bazillion students. And the Jefferson Trust. So this was it feels very appropriate because I work so multidisciplinary that to have a multidisciplinary host team was amazing, and it really showed today. So thank you all so much. I'm a little bit nervous because I'm in the room that I took my first architecture class in. It's just super weird. You guys can't even imagine. It's like, I never thought I would ever get invited. I never saw myself speaking here. I was always where you're sitting, like nervous, scared to death. So you never know what life will bring you. So I would like to just share a little bit about my journey then, like from these seats to where I am, because we have so many students here, and to help you understand that this is a longer game, right? This is not a quick thing. It took a while to get to this piece, and this is where I started, right? So one of these kids doesn't look like the other kids, and you know, my family desegregated a white neighborhood 2 hours from here in Stafford County, Virginia. And it was my first experience with inequity in school, right? It was a difficult experience to be a black child who was very rambunctious and very full of energy within that context. And so that kind of was an early understanding that, wow, you know, this is not a fair society to me. And what was my value within society. And another system, aside from the educational system, that my father, who my parents are here, my father often told me about was that this is one system you definitely don't want anything to do with, right? Don't get a divorce. Like, you don't ever want to go in these doors. And so I became scared of the criminal justice system. And I associated it with this building, right? This is the Stafford County Courthouse where I live, right? It's super Virginia, right? Super, you know, colonial. And you can tell it's a courthouse, right? It looks like one. And so I would remember getting scared when we would drive by this building. And so I was just afraid of justice. And that justice wasn't for me. And so it left my mind, right? But despite my fear of this building, I went to architecture school. I went to UVA. This is me at UVA. It's all fuzzy because I'm old and stuff. But, you know, I'm in studio upstairs, and we were doing a DMV under a freeway or something, and my building was like a car wreck or whatever. I had some concept. But it was a party-driven design, right? So we were doing very formalist architecture. So I learned about that. I felt really ready to go out into the world to do my thing with a really solid education in architecture. And then I went to Columbia, and they were doing this, right? Blobs. I didn't want to make blobs. And I went to Bernard Schumi, who was the dean at the time. For those of you who don't know, he's a very famous architect coming out of the deconstructivist movement. And he told me that I went to the wrong school, that this was not the school for me, because what I wanted to do was, I was like, well, Dean Schumi, we're near Harlem. You know, why are we building cities in China? I've never been to China. Why aren't we working in Harlem with people right nearby? And the sort of discouragement from him, I went to the planning director at the time. He says, oh, Deanna, you're never going to get this school to do that. And I think I thought that it just wasn't something that you could do as an architect. So my initial idea to practice differently was kind of squashed temporarily at that time. And so I left the United States. And I went overseas, and I worked for a gentleman named Eric Kuhn, and we were designing shopping centers. So I became a shopping center retail architect for 6 years, and I designed shopping centers all over the world, in the United Kingdom. I designed shopping centers in Dubai, in the Middle East. And what I was learning was something that I hadn't necessarily learned before. I was learning about culture. I was learning about people. and how to design for people. Yes, it was through the vehicle of a shopping center, but I was learning something really powerful. I was doing shopping centers in China, in Malaysia, in Australia, where I lived for a number of years. And I came back to the United States, and I was designing homes for the wealthy. I was designing office spaces and a lot of institutional buildings in higher ed. And I started to ask myself some questions about why I was practicing. Who was I practicing for? And essentially, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of architecture? I didn't see anyone that looked like me. I didn't have any clients or stakeholders who were from my community. I didn't know anybody who I was working with. We never talked to the people who were going to use the buildings. I never once talked to a stakeholder during this whole time, and something seemed not right. And I was beginning a little bit demoralized about what I was doing. And so I started to do my own projects on the side. I started to design and build installations for various nonprofits in my community. I did a fashion installation for low-income folks in Upper Manhattan, right? So a Latinx installation. I worked on an installation for filmmakers. And so this was at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, where we created a series of rooms that told the story of lives of people all over the world. I was feeling incredibly fulfilled, again, around the kind of work that I was doing. We started to work with youth poets who were coming from various communities around the Bay Area. And how do you build a place for poetry? So I was becoming an artist. I was becoming a maker. And during this time, a video game designer came into one of these exhibits. And he reached out to me. And he said, you know, I think I need an architect for my video game. And I was like, well, let's take a look at what the situation is. He showed me this thing. I was like, you know, you do. It was an island filled with blocks, right? It was like a mess. I was like, you do need an architect, but I don't do that stuff, right? That's just not what I do. I'm an architect. I do real buildings. And it's so funny when you've been given the doorway out and you don't take it. Have you ever had that experience? And so like I did a little workshop with him, like, this is fun, you know, I'm having a good time. And about a month later, I called him up because I realized this was my way out. This is how I was going to get out. And I quit my job. I was able to leave the job. And at the same time, I had started to think about a couple things. But the one thing I wanted to do was get out and really explore my own ideas and my own work. And so this is a separate lecture I give about The Witness. Does anyone play video games here? Have any video game players? Have you seen The Witness? You should check it. It's not bad. It's a video game I worked on for 5 years, and it basically funded me and supported me to look at this. Right? So on the side, I was designing video games, but on the other half of my life, I made a decision to do the thing my father told me never to do, which was to look at this system of mass incarceration. And so most of you may know that we incarcerate more of our citizens than any country in the world. We used to be over 2 million, now we're slightly under 2 million, and we have 7 to 8 million of our citizens under some form of carceral control. So that means they're in probation, they're on parole, they're in some ways attached to the system. You may also know that a disproportionate amount of them are people of color. Mostly black and brown men. 1 in 3 black men can find themselves incarcerated during their lifetime. And it's a grossly disproportionate issue that we haven't even begun to address. What is also happening is we see multiple generations of incarceration. So what we've done is we've decimated families and the entire community as we've been literally invested in criminal justice and disinvested in communities of color for many, many generations. And it's a disaster. It's really a disaster. So one thing that I started to believe and understand, which I always like to tell people, and maybe you already know this, but I want to be really clear that the things that we believe, the values that we have, we build them. Right? The things, if we believe that punishment is the way to address things, that's a value and a belief that we have. So it might be just in your mind, but what happened is your thoughts then become concretized. You know, we build racism into our cities. We build classism into our neighborhoods. And the problem with this is that it does 2 things. It exacerbates the hateful feelings, the thoughts, the ideas, and it amplifies them. There's nothing like built infrastructure to ricochet and amplify a belief. And then the thing is, We're long gone, and it's still here. It's still here. And it holds the values of a thing, and when you try to change, it's hard to change, right? It's hard to move past a freeway that you've built, cutting a neighborhood in half. It's hard to take them down. They're just there. So as architects, as designers, as a society, what do we value? Do we believe in punishment? Do we believe in reparations? And so I started to look at how architects and designers were participating in criminal justice. And this is what we were building. These are the kinds of things that we were doing. And I include those prisons, jails, courthouses, detention centers, police stations, youth detention facilities, the infrastructure for this $70 billion system is vast. You know, a lot of people's jobs, a lot of economics behind it. And what we also see happening now, which we have to be very careful about, is the beautification of cages to house black and brown people and low-income white folks, which are actually one of the fastest rising populations in our institutions. And I thought, well, I don't really know what to do about this. Right? How do I insert myself as an architect and designer in this system? There wasn't really a way. I wasn't going to do a prettier box for this. And so it was then, gratefully, in 2006, I started to, I was happy to be back in the US, right? I was just glad to be home. And I went to Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday in West Oakland, and I heard Angela Davis and Fania Davis. Does everyone know who Angela Davis is? Good. And I heard her and her sister talk about restorative justice. And they told me something I had not heard about before. So who knows what restorative justice is? Okay. A lot of you. Really, that's a lot. I'm impressed. I'm going to do a brief description for those of you who don't. Who does not know what restorative justice is? Okay, we got a few. So restorative justice is a philosophy and a set of practices that says when a harm or crime has been committed, it is a breach of relationship. And that the needs of the survivor or the victim are really the top priority. That is what must be met. Right? It's not a crime against the state. Real people were harmed, families were harmed, individuals harmed, communities were harmed, and that those who committed the offense have an obligation to make amends and repair the breach if possible. And so what happens is you bring the parties together for a dialogue, after which a plan is created to address the offender's conduct in the hope that they can return to their community unstigmatized. It is about healing, reparation. It is a dramatically and radically different point of view around justice, and it's old. It came long before the European model that we have, and indigenous communities all over the country are reigniting these practices, including our First Nations people. You're seeing the Truth and Reconciliation courts in South Africa, if you're familiar with that, the Gacaca courts in Rwanda, victim offender mediation. If you've watched Van Jones's show, The Redemption Project, that is another example of restorative justice. And we're seeing it in our schools as they change policies from suspensions and expulsions to restorative justice. And I thought to myself, this is a system that I can support. This is what and how I would like to see justice done in my community, and this is a justice that is for me. And so I asked another question. How do we design an infrastructure for restorative justice? And that's really where I began, just with that question. And I did do the thing that architects do, right? I was like, I'm just going to design it by myself, right? I just went in a room and I made this thing. It's pretty, right? It's nice. I was like, it's like organic and feminine. It's like, I call this the mediation womb, right? It's like a womb. And I was like, this is it, right? And then I had a moment. Thank God. I had a moment where I was like, it can't go like this. What do I know about this, right? I don't really know. And so I was very fortunate at that time to find a restorative justice practitioner who was interested in design. Her name was Barb Taves, Dr. Barb Taves. And we found each other by a miracle. And we started to talk and work together. And what she was helped me to do was we started to engage those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We started to work with currently incarcerated men and women inside of the institution who almost 99% of the time are both the survivors of violence and harm and the perpetrators of that. And so you can imagine they had a vast amount of knowledge. And we created a toolkit for working, for the first time, working in high security settings at the intersection of restorative justice and design. And it's been one of the most powerful experiences of my life is to work with these men and women and have them be like, what kind of environment would you need to face the person that you murdered, the family you harmed? What would you need to face the person who killed your children? Which often I'm hearing stories like that inside of the institution. And so we just brought them the basic tools that architects use, but just papers that we folded and ripped, right? Because we can't bring knives into the institution, we can't bring all those things, but we were able to do all of these things inside. And so these are some of the things that they've been able to create, right? Visions for a different kind of space and environment. Models made of paper that we actually have been able to display at the Cooper Hewitt Museum. So their work has traveled around the country, and we use the same toolkit in environments with communities as well. This is the Healing Sun Center, which is a space where victim and offender can come together to engage in dialogue. This is the Community Center for Wellness and Reconciliation, which one of my students was in tears as he presented. He's like, this is the kind of space that is going to promote healing for me. And we also realize it's a weird thing that, okay, you know, we're developing knowledge, we're learning all this stuff, we're teaching skills. But then the other thing we noticed, as I said my student was doing, is that people were accessing trauma through the design process, right? So we heard of art therapy, but design can do the same thing, and I was ill-prepared for that experience. You know, I'm asking different questions, we're creating things, and people are really going into deep emotional spaces inside of our design studio. And I realized that I myself needed to get a different kind of training, and I got trained as a circle keeper myself and started to be learning how to hold people in trauma spaces, right, as a designer and an architect, which is something you don't learn in school. So that was something that had to happen. This is the exhibit at the Cooper Hewitt Museum, where my students from San Quentin were able to present their work on a different vision for justice, and they came out really beautifully. It's been traveling around. We're also working with Adovo out of Chicago to digitize this as they start to bring tablets into correctional settings, so we can go from working with hundreds of students a year to thousands. And so it will spread the idea around all over the country on how we can engage with design and also link it to just awareness and understanding of what has to happen. So this all fed into all the projects we're doing, right? We learned everything from that initial step. And what I want to show you today are 3 project types that we believe are required to end mass incarceration from our experience to date. I'm going to show you these 3 types so that we can understand what that process looks like. Right? So some of these projects are processes. They're not just projects. And what I want to start is what we're calling restorative reinvestment. Right? So the first project type we need to do is a divest invest strategy, where we're taking money from the criminal justice system, which we have some folks here who can talk to you about that better than I, and investing in the communities most impacted by the system. And one of the areas that we like to focus on is diversion. Right? So we don't want people entering the system at all. So what is the infrastructure that we need to divert people so you never go there, which is what restorative justice is able to do. And the very first project I did was a simple thing. It was this dirty trailer in East Oakland in a school there. We were working with restorative justice for Oakland youth who were, instead of suspending and expelling students, they were bringing them into peacemaking in this space. And they started in this disgusting space. I came in and I just did simple stuff, right? I got them some free carpet. We did some paint. We talked through what they would need. And what ended up happening is the coordinator said that the space had become such a place of refuge for them, the students, the teachers, that the circles that she was running there were more impactful. And so I was starting to see like, oh yes, design and restorative justice and the outputs and the outcomes are directly linked. And we started to create a whole document for how to create restorative spaces in schools, which you can get on our website, that we deploy to high schools around the country so they can start to think about how to do that in their own context. And the second project, related, was we scaled up to a building. And so, you have to imagine I'm running all over the country, like trying to convince people we need to make spaces for peacemaking. People ignored me for a long time, but I was very, very persistent. And one group I managed to convince was the Center for Court Innovation out of New York City. And the Center for Court Innovation was doing something pretty radical in Syracuse, New York, in the near west side. It's a very low-income community, very richly diverse, beautifully diverse. And what they were doing was implementing a diversion program. So the DA, prosecutors would divert cases out of court. These are quality of life crimes, right? So someone takes your purse, takes your car. And they were diverting them into peacemaking. And this is Native American peacemaking. So it's a form of restorative justice, but what's different is elders in the community would be the ones, the peacemakers, and they would be conducting the process. And this is the first time that we've taken Native American peacemaking practices and brought them into a non-Native community for the very first time in this country. And the Navajo Nation was very supportive in doing this. And so while they were setting up the process, what I was able to do was to conduct a design process with the community. How many of you have been in a peacemaking center? So we have a couple. How many have been in a courthouse? A prison? A jail? Right. So spaces for peacemaking are not common. Right? I did not know what they should look like. I really didn't. And so what we were able to do is I used my circle keeper training to work with the community, and it helped because they were learning a new cultural practice. It's not like they were doing this every day. So we were able to do it in a way through design, this peacemaking palette, which for those of you coming to my workshop tomorrow, we're going to do it. So you'll learn it yourself. And I was able to get an incredible amount of knowledge on what kind of environment we needed to make. And we also learned about location, right? So peace building, location, location, location. You can see here that in the majority of the time, you're probably very familiar with this, all our justice infrastructure is located downtown, concentrated downtown, expecting everyone to go downtown. And a lot of folks, you'll see a project that we did just to deal with this, they can't get there. They don't have a car. It's not hard. They might have kids they have to take care of. And so a half mile is too far. Right? And restorative justice is a hyper-local condition. It's by and for the community. So it needs to be deeply embedded in the community. And it needs to be on neutral territory. So it took us a while just to find the site that everyone felt it was okay for them to come to. That's a negotiation. And so we finally found an old crack house, drug house that was in the community. And we were able to take that and turn that into a center for peacemaking with the Center for Court Innovation. And so that project is complete. It's been open maybe now for just a year and a half. And what's been happening is that people are coming into the environment, right? They're not familiar with peacemaking. They're very stressed out. There's a lot of anxiety. And they're looking around the environment and they're choosing restorative justice for the first time. They're choosing peacemaking. And they're choosing it because what they're seeing is a justice that doesn't look like the one that they've been traumatized by. And so instead of doing the 10 cases they thought they were going to do that year, they did over 80. And the over 80, they told me, was clearly because of having a place that people felt safe, a place that reflected a different set of values. And so what we were again seeing was how design and place can amplify and change and shift cultural practices. And so I felt relatively comfortable. I didn't go make that little blobby mediation wound, but I definitely was like, I got some clear guidelines, right? After working like hundreds of incarcerated people, we're working in community. And so these are just some of the things that we learned that spaces for peacemaking need to have. Right? They need to be flexible. They need to be integrated with the natural environment. You need cool-off spaces. You need to be able to look around the room and modulate your fight, and freeze responses with texture, with color, with objects you can touch. You know, you need to have a window. It has to have a kitchen, right? So there were just things that we were learning that we were able to deploy, and we started to design prototype spaces of what these places could look like for people. And they don't look like the square rooms that we're in. They don't look like this hierarchical condition where you're looking at me. Right? We're on the same level, right, as an equitable piece. And we specifically designed one in Oakland on the water against the backdrop of the courthouse, right? Because we want people to understand, you can see the courthouse here up on the left and on the right, like typical, right? This is where the Black Panthers were all held at one time. And that the image of the two, the way that one is much more at a human scale, it's broken down, that this is what justice can start to look like and looks very different from the one that we've known. So the building of buildings is it's time consuming, it's expensive, and we are in a fast moving culture where things need to be scaled up, right? We've got a lot of work to do. So doing these small built projects was great, deploying design guidelines was great, but we really wanted to find a way to scale the work. So a new idea came out when I read Prison Fellowships International wrote a book called The Restorative Justice City. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but what it is a document that says, here's what a city of 1 million people would look like if we made a wholesale shift from the punitive system to a restorative justice system. And I read this, and there was no infrastructure in it, right? It was all programs and stuff. I'm like, this is a different city. This has implications way beyond a building. And so we started to look at an idea about what happened if we really divest from this system and begin to invest in a totally different infrastructure. And the thing that we've been developing and continuing to develop is the Restorative Justice City Reinvestment Tool. The Restorative Justice City Reinvestment Tool looks at a data mapping tool that starts to collect data. We were also very inspired by Laura Kurgan's work at the Spatial Information Lab, which is where this image is from, and the work of the Justice Mapping Center, that we could use data to help change policy. We could use data to help to start to look at, in a planning sense, where the investments needed to be. And so this is an image of sort of showing we would get community-driven data to start to fill out the different neighborhoods and track it against macro-level data so that communities could be like, look, you need to disinvest in that, and here are the assets in my community that we need to invest in. And we truly believe that this is the way we have to go, that the participatory budgeting training, and give communities the agency using data to help identify these projects. So I was able to convene a lot of folks in Oakland. I was like, can Oakland be the first restorative justice city? I really wanted it to be. We have some of the country's leading experts in it. I gathered them all. I got the Oakland Police Department in the room. The county was in the room, thinking about, for the day, what does a restorative justice city look like in Oakland? And we created a whole set of action domains with the Institute for the Future, right? Sort of economic justice, social justice, all of these qualities and aspects. And some of them were like, how do we facilitate restorative justice dialogue in the public realm? And I think we can start to really participate as artists and designers in doing this. And it's critical, because we have to heal from the past as much as we have to heal from the present. And so these are examples of projects. Some you may know, some you may not. The one in the lower left is David Best's temple in Londonderry, where Protestants and Catholics were coming together to build a temple that they burned in the end, that brought the community together for the first time. This is the level of public art and public process and ritual that we will need to heal from centuries, decades of pain. Obviously, you know, the Vietnam War Memorial. The Philadelphia Mural Project works with survivors and perpetrators of violence to create murals that beautify the city, and that this is a critical path towards creating the kind of environments that we need. And then, of course, I was like, well, we have to design for impact, right? Designing for impact is part of this restorative justice city. And so we created this corridor of resources through Oakland. We have a life term discrepancy. So in the hills of Oakland, people live 15 years longer than people who live in the flats where I live. And so these little hot hubs, those little orange pieces, were restorative justice hubs and smaller hubs that were integrated into the schools and libraries in the community. And so it was around this time I started to realize that, okay, we have to do mapping, we got to scale up, we got to design. But I also started to realize economics was an issue, right? How do we pay for this? You know, there's a huge economic disparity. And so if we want to talk about restorative justice, we have to talk about a restorative economics model. And so out of this process, out of this thinking, came the country's first Center for Restorative Justice and Restorative Economics. And it's called Restore Oakland. And this is one of those little hot dots. Right? So this was an exciting first project to engage in. And I'm so happy now I can actually show you real photos of it. I've been showing renderings forever. It opened 2 weeks ago. And so I spent 2 years talking to the community about what should be there, what it should look like, how would that work. We were able to develop something called the concept development process, which is really a critical process for us, where we go into community, we help them over the course of 3 to 6 months develop an aesthetic vision for their restorative reinvestment, a financial model. We do the full pro forma for them so they know how much it's going to cost. And then we work with program providers, so people are doing innovative programming. And things are honestly moving so fast, like I have to update this diagram. We are now working with policymakers. So it's program, place, policy, and finance. And that those things, we work together as a team to develop a vision that we can then go to social impact investors, banks, equity lenders to pay for the project and help people to build this stuff. And so we gutted this building. And on the ground floor, we have a restaurant that trains low-wage restaurant workers to get living wage jobs. That part's not done. It'll be done in a month, so I'll show that rendering. And what it does is the largest fine dining chaining kitchen in the country. And it's breaking the racial divide by training the low-wage restaurant workers who are often formerly incarcerated, very low-income folks, to get jobs that are sometimes over $100,000 a year. So they're getting living wage jobs in this environment. And that's the restorative economics piece in this project. Restorative economics is different in every project that we do. And as architects and designers, we can always be looking for ways to create jobs, to build wealth in communities. And it's not something we think about a lot, but it's something that we can do. And so with this project, we helped negotiate the purchase and sale agreement. We helped with the fundraising. We did full architectural services. And we did this with a relatively small team. And so on the top floor is where the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights is doing all their activism. Causa Justa Just Cause does immigrant rights and tenant rights. It's a huge community organizing hub. And then it also has the county's first dedicated spaces for restorative justice, which will happen here. And they will be now able to double their caseload, diverting young people out of court, ages 15 to 21. And that's the only thing that will happen in this space, nothing else. So, replicate the prototype, right? This is a prototype. We need more of them. We can't just do one. And what's been exciting is that this project has ignited communities in other cities who want the same thing. And so we're working in Detroit with Allied Media Projects, do a very similar project there, where DJDS, my company, will buy adjacent land and property to become developers for the first time, creating an entire social justice hub and a social justice campus, which will start next year. We'll be working in Jackson, Mississippi with the New West Jackson Cooperative. This is a very low-income community in Jackson. They own 65 homes, and they're doing incredible work, and we'll be going to help them both master plan and develop a restorative justice and restorative economics center for them that they own, right? So they will be owners of this, and we're literally watching people move from poverty into wealth creation. So the second typology that we're using, that we need to end mass incarceration, is what we're calling restorative reentry. Right? So when people reenter their community from prison and jail, they have probably the hardest thing ever to do. In California, there are literally over 3,000 barriers to success. It's very, very difficult. And so how do we support those reentering? Because if we don't, they will recidivate, meaning they will go back and you'll continue the loop. So this has become a new project type we've been working on. And a lot of our concern is the relationship between systems, right? So the relationship of mass incarceration to homelessness, to our educational system, to our foster care system. Foster in San Quentin, 85% of the men incarcerated there have had some contact with the foster care system. It's very, very high. So one of the things we've been doing, we like to stack functions, is starting to work with Black churches who have land, right? So they're asset rich and cash poor, and they need support in the development of their land and can be used to support the populations who are literally coming back. People don't want them there often, but this is the community they came from, right? So they're returning. And so we've been working with landowners, Black churches, and we're also working with high impact program providers. In this case, we're working with 2 organizations in the Bay Area. Building Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency provides full wraparound services for those reentering. And so the church has an old charter school. It's empty. It's been empty forever. And this is a community, one of the few communities left in Oakland where there are Black folks and brown folks still living. It's getting very gentrified. And so what we were able to do is work with the community to re-envision and to repurpose their land to be what we call the Hope Reentry Campus. And the Hope Reentry Campus, as with most of our projects, has a social enterprise in it. As we start to do the financial modeling, we do both the design, but we also help them think, well, look, if you can get a social enterprise in here, you can generate revenue, you can activate the street. There's a high school next door. Where, remember that trailer I showed you with the janky trailer that we fixed up? This is right next door to that. And you create a hub where both the community, those who are formerly incarcerated, who need to be reunited with their families and their community, and the church can come together and get to understand one another again and get to reunite. Yeah, thank you. So it has many types of uses in it. They're able to get counseling, they do jobs training, skills training over 3 levels. And then we also developed a new idea out of this process called the mobile refuge rooms. And these are spaces, because usually when men and women come back, they're in rooms with 9 and 10 people, right? It's highly stressful. Many of the folks we know coming back have had their money stolen that they're saving. They've been assaulted. So we developed an idea for these rooms that pop out to create safe environments for them, and is also cheaper than the cost of construction of building new walls. And so we've built our first prototype. The Alameda County Department of Probation has bought 15 of these, so off the rendering. And what we've done is we work with formerly incarcerated men and women to design it, but also to fabricate it. So we have a local initiative with Laney College, which is our local community college, where they're learning digital fabrication. And so these men have both helped us design it, but they also now have a living wage skill that they can use in digital fabrication. So again, stacking the functions, and we believe this can be a spin-off company in digital fabrication doing this very thing. So again, restorative justice, restorative economics, and adding design to that is something that we can constantly be thinking through our process. So I'm going to go quicker because I'm running out of time, but the last group we have is repurpose and reimagine. So another issue is good news is we're closing these things down, right? So we have some folks here I hope you can meet, Liz Ryan, Valerie Slater from various, both from RISE and from Youth First who are doing this. They're here. Can you just raise your hand real quick? They're here. So know that there are people in the room, which is great, who are doing this work on the ground. Those are the people we serve. But one project we're looking at is called the Welding Justice Project. We have hundreds of jobs in the welding industry and the trades industry that are not fulfilled. We also have hundreds of prisons that are being closed down. When they get closed down and they don't get repurposed, often they're reused as detention centers, immigration detention centers. They sit left vacant. There's an economic impact. So we're working with the American Welding Society. We're working with various prisons, one in Beaumont, Texas right now. This was actually a youth prison, to turn them into welding schools, right? So people are able to go there and get living wage jobs. They're perfect for that. And this will be the first model, potentially being able to do 50 to 100 of these around the country. So looking at every project as a prototype that we can begin to replicate. We're also working in Atlanta right now with the mayor's office to shut down this facility. This building is hideous. It's going to be good times. But it's the first time we've seen community organizers and a city government coming together to close a facility down and to turn it into a center for equity, social equity. So for the first time, my organization is engaging an entire city around how to repurpose and reuse this facility. And so we've begun that process. It's almost a year-long process to do that. But this process is also a process that we're going to be codifying so that we can duplicate this in other cities, because we believe this is the process we need to do to close them down and to repurpose them. So the last project I'll show is weird, and it's not like any of the other projects. So we'll see what you think about this. So the pop-up village is a site activation tool to address this issue. Right? So this is a neighborhood near where I live. It's right near, not far from Google and Apple's campuses, right? So you can see the economic inequity. This is what disinvestment looks like. And so building buildings takes a long time. And so one of the ideas was, could we use mobile architecture as a way to address the issue in the moment and serve more people? And so the pop-up village was addressing can't cross turf lines, right? We had a real issue that people couldn't get to school. They couldn't get to things for fear of being shot. People don't have a car because there's no public investment in that. So people can't get to school, and that was exacerbating the issue. And so the pop-up village brings a constellation of resources to underserved communities in a beautiful environment. And what does that look like? And so again, a long process of helping people, what should be there, where should it go, what should it look like, was something that we started to engage in back in 2015. And right now, the village goes to these 3 sites. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Bay Area, but it goes to San Francisco, it goes to Oakland, and now to East Oakland. And the things that are in it, it's not like a farmer's market, right? There's services in it, there's retail in it, there's food and agriculture in it, there's design in it, there's health and wellness, there's a space for young people. That this is what the community said needed to be in the village. And so for us, all our environments need to be therapeutic. Right? They need to support our health and wellness, and that beauty is important. Right? Design and beauty is important for people. And so for us, we're like, well, what is it? Like, what makes up a village? And we'd be able to start to create a constellation of assets that we deploy now about once a month, sometimes twice a month around the city. We have pop-up shops. And the pop-up shops are used to support micro-entrepreneurship programs. So low-income micro-entrepreneurs in the community are able to come to sell and make money. And these things are boxes that then kind of fold open to create an environment that people can come into and use. We have mobile site components. We have trees that are in planters that you can roll around. There's seating for people. There's turf. There's sunshades. It's a nice environment for people to spend time with. We've started to take vehicles and turn them into other things. We were taking municipal buses, and we turned it into a classroom that brings GED and high school education to communities who, frankly don't have access to the schools that they need, formerly incarcerated people in particular. And the vehicle was designed, I don't know if you all know Burning Man. Does anyone know Burning Man? You guys know Burning Man? I love Burning Man. And I tell you, Burning Man are the only people that can do this kind of work, right? They know how to trick out a vehicle. I couldn't get a regular contractor to do it. So we were able to strip these things out using Rhino and a lot of, CNC milling, and to get an environment that could house 15 students. They also do restorative justice circles in here, and a teacher. And it's been interesting. It's out on the road, so it anchors the village, but it's out and about. And what's happening is people pulling themselves out of the bricks and mortar sites to go to school on this bus. They don't even show up to class if the bus isn't there. I was surprised, right? You think, oh, it's stigmatizing going to school on a bus, but not the case. Not the case. We also worked with about 60 women to develop another vehicle called the Women's Mobile Refuge. And they told me, these are the things that we need when we are released from jail in the middle of the night to support us. Right? They don't need beds, but they needed access to hygiene, change of clothes, access to their friends and family. Where am I going to go? And so we were able to take a trailer, work with our Burning Man folks again, and gut it, and turn it into a place that they could use. We also did pattern making with them, and I was able to create patterns from their designs that were used for the textiles on the interior, right? So there's multiple layers of work. And the vehicle's up and running now, serving women released from jail at night, but also women during the day in community, and survivors of sex trafficking, which we have a big sex trafficking issue in West Oakland, so this is a refuge for those women. So I won't go too much through outcomes. Everyone loves data. Just need to know you have to collect the data. I'm forever trying to find a way to evaluate our projects. But the outcomes economically are that our vendors are making money. People are becoming connected. They're feeling safer through this project. It has been very impactful, and it continues on and on. So I will end with this video, which is 40 seconds. And I will... We always have the barber. You can't have a village without the barber. So that is it from me. I'll leave you with that one.
Thank you so much. I know we have a lot of interested questions in the room, I'm sure. So who wants to start us off?
In terms of design issues with all of the restorative processes and projects you've done, do you ever really concentrate on the sounds of these spaces? The sound of the voice in this process seems to be really essential. And if so, how do you go about that?
Yeah, at the moment, sound has not been a focus. It is one of the senses that needs to be supported in the space. Generally, what we find people do is just to have sound machines, right? The sound of water, the sound of nature as a really simple and easy way. I think it's important to be able to make any space restorative, given that there's not a lot of money coming in to build these things. And so we were talking earlier today about how we're able to support people. Like if you're in an environment that's not conducive to that, right? You're in a basement or you're in some place that's nasty. That sound is one way to help do that.
Okay, so I have two questions, but not to monopolize people's time. I'll ask them both, and you can choose which one you want
Okay.
to answer. So I'm curious about how you operationalize all of this stuff, aka how do you sleep, or get any sleep doing this work? And the other one is how do you work with policymakers to ensure that this has some long-term sustainability?
Yeah, sure. I don't sleep that much, so that's a quick question. But the policy making piece has been very interesting. And so what we're doing now is, for example, with the Vera Institute for Justice, we're going to be going into a planning phase. They will be going in and looking at existing jails or existing facilities and helping the municipality to change the process, I would say, or change the policy to let people out, right? You don't need to incarcerate people for all this stuff. And then at the same time, we're doing this in Atlanta too. So the policy folks are going in, looking at state policy and the local policies to be able to change them and do that while we are engaging them around the design, which is related to the programming, which is also tied to policy, right? So we have the operationalization of it is we have 3 task forces, 3 working groups. We have a task force focused on programming. We have a task force focused on the building. And then we have a task force focused on policy. We meet every month together as a working group to look at the intersectionality of that, and then they have working sessions in between. And so when I go next to Atlanta, I'll do a process with them where we'll mix those groups and we'll start to look at the design and the programming while the policy people are like, okay, this is the policy you need to change to do that. So the same will happen with the Vera Institute. And so I think we're going to start to see these teams, right? A design team, a policy team, and a programming team working together, the intersection of that, and we're figuring it out. I mean, no one's really done it before. I always am like, we never done it before. I wish I could do something I had done before. Going back to shopping centers. But it hasn't been done, and it's very exciting to think, like, this is the process we need. I don't know what that horrible building's going to end up looking like at the end. We're going to fix it as best we can. It's 500,000 square feet of old jail. But there's so many of them. There's so many. And we have to find out what the process is so then you can go do it in your community. Use this process. So that's so far. And I can keep you posted, like, here's what it's looking like because we are documenting it. And it's in development. You're a friend. But there's someone back there, but okay. Okay, good. I mean, it's always a barrier. The biggest barrier is the union, the correctional officers union. They're powerful. The good news, I think on Wednesday, California mandated that private prisons are illegal in the state of California. This just happened. So that's great news because they are problematic. And, I think we are thinking, like, how can we get to the correctional officers to help them understand, like, because this is their life and their livelihood, even though it's killing them, right? Even though it's bad for them, they are a very strong force to be reckoned with. So part of what we can do is find the innovators, like the people who are willing to do it, show people how it's done. This is what you can do. Here's what the outcome and impact is. So every time we do any project, it's meant to be a prototype. So we consider ourselves as prototype developers, and then we want people to replicate it. Here's what we learned. Let me give it to you. You can go do it. And I think the private prison industry is not going to get on board anytime soon. And they will continue to be a barrier.
Since all of your work is pioneering new territory, but also relying on local expertise, how big is your team? How do you balance your knowledge that you're building with the local knowledge?
Yeah. So my team is small because we partner well, right? Everything we do is highly collaborative. We learn how to do that. My team is also super multidisciplinary. So we have 4 architects. We have 1 real estate development and finance lead. We have a community organizer on staff. I have an operations manager on staff. So the operations person actually runs the village and events and those kinds of things. We have graphic design and branding people on staff. And so it rounds us out about 9 or 10 people. I am about to hire another 5. So we're growing quickly, and I don't want to get bigger than that, and I don't think we need to. So I think our sweet spot is in this front-end concept development work, and then we have often architects of record locally who we work with to get there. We have great community organizers on the ground, and we know how to play well in the sandbox with people, and I think that's the only way we'll be able to keep it small. Because getting big is too difficult because the projects are too complex. They require a very odd set of skills, right? You need to be a good designer and be able to work in low-income communities of color. I've had to let people go because they don't have that capacity. So it's hard to find people for our practice.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's really good. Coming from San Francisco, it's good to see some of that on the East Coast here. But my question is less about the regional as it is about the fiscal sustainability. So Glide, Delancey Street, a lot of the projects in the West Coast still have an element of foundational support.
Sure, yeah.
And then after the foundation either walks out or the grant ends, we all deal with how do you sustain that. So what insights and what strategies and what are the ways that you've approached it so that this work continues once either your footprint or others pick it up?
That's a really good question. And part of, just to start with my organization's long-term capacity, this also speaks to a previous question. So our goal is to not be fully reliant on philanthropic dollars. We are a nonprofit. Right now, we are mostly philanthropically funded with some, and this is business model stuff, which I think is really where we're also cutting edge of architecture. Like, how do we run these businesses? So we also do fee for service, but we also are developing a product. So the mobile refuge rooms are a product that we can sell, right? We've already sold some. So part of it is like, what can we design that can be is unitized? And because we also do real estate development and we support communities to own property, right? So ownership of real estate is a great way to create and generate wealth, as it has in this country for those who've been the fortunate ones. So my organization, in purchasing of land in Detroit, what we will do is we'll build our own projects, and we will now be able to generate revenue through the ownership of property through rents. And we will be able to take that money and reinvest it in new prototypes. And ideally, we co-own or co-develop with local community partners. So cooperative ownership is something we're very interested in. So they have equity, right? So we want equity in real estate. And that in equity in real estate, as architects, there's no reason why we shouldn't get in the development game, right? Developers are not geniuses. They are often greedy, but they've capitalized on how. If we want to fight gentrification, I don't have all the answers, but one answer is people need to own their stuff. We have to help them own their stuff, and my organization wants to own some stuff so that my organization can stay viable. So we are just about to move into that. I'm super excited about it. I have a grant report due on Friday that will, if I get it, I think I will enable us to purchase that land and begin that project. I see so many people. Sorry, Dean Berman, but you're like the dean, so we'll just have coffee later and we'll talk about all this stuff. Okay.
Hi, so I was wondering what you think are some of the key factors, like what you believe are the most important to address in buildings such as the Atlanta jail that you're repurposing. What do you think is most important to change in order for it not to come across as aggressive or imposing, and so that it's a successful restorative and welcoming space?
Yeah, well, I mean, with facilities like that, the first issue is the windows are tiny, right? There's no light coming in. And so what you're looking at is a pretty expansive and extensive remodel. We're going to have to reskin the building. We're going to have to demo almost all of the interior, possibly, right? Because it's all concrete block walls. These buildings are heavy, they're expensive. And we're going to be tracking the cost of that against the cost, what's the minimum we can do and what's the maximum that can be done, and how do we pay for that? So you've seen a lot of these repurposed facilities turned into luxury hotels, artist studios. There's a lot of that piece because they're expensive to remodel. So the process we're using with the city and all the people in it, like all kinds of groups are coming in there. I've been yelled at 100 times. I'll be yelled at 100 more times. is trying to be restorative. Like, what do you need to see here to feel like there's been some harm repaired? So regardless of what we do, there will be some environments in here that are for homeless folks, that are for formerly incarcerated folks, and workforce development, right? What we're hearing now is people want it to be a place where they can come and workforce development. We're also working at the citywide level because you can't just change the building. You have to think about the whole neighborhood around it. How is that restorative? So it may be we take a swath of it and redevelop that, and then other parts, you know, do they need to be luxury condos? We'll do the modeling to show them, right? We're not going to give them something that's not realistic, right? If you want to reclad the building, this is what it is, and we'll have to do that, right? You can't put people in here other than that, and almost every facility has that issue, and so it's working around those constraints.
I'm sitting next to her, so I
Yeah, so you might as well say, you guys just pass it around.
So it's kind of two questions. One's quicker. Do you have internships for students? And then the other one is, like, other than lectures like this, how can we start to incorporate some of this education in our architecture classes? Because we don't really get that so far.
Sure. So I do sometimes take interns. We do sometimes. I just had one actually. So, and she was great. She was great. She just left for school. So we will probably take some interns one or two next summer. So that's true. I think in terms of incorporating the education, I would be really curious to talk to your folks here. And I know that it is happening here, right? Elgin and Barbara are both doing that work. And that is not exciting because that wasn't happening when I was here. Let me tell you all, it was different in the early 90s. We're not talking about this stuff that you all are talking about right now. So this is a super exciting time and opportunity. And I also believe you saw what I tried. I tried to drive the Dean of Columbia to do stuff. And you can do that as students. You know, you can initiate. You can start things. You don't have to wait for people to tell you what's right. And you have leaders here in the university who I think would help you. In terms of contacting me, I'm happy to share anything that we're doing and the tools that we have. You know, I know that it is an opportunity for you to get engaged with the folks that are here to see what's possible, and I will give you whatever I need, right? Whatever you need, you can have it. You know, I'm happy to share because I want it to happen more and more, and we need your generation to be thinking like this. It's really, really important. We have spent decades, millennia, working for the wealthy and being in response to the wealthy and the institutional, and it's not, look where it's gotten us. You know, so what is our role as leaders? You know, how can architects and designers actually lead rather than respond to competitions, rather than respond to RFPs? And so that's sort of my advocacy, is like, how do we practice? How can we really lead social change? And we can. We can. We just have to start to change our mindset about how that works, and the business model has to change a bit too.
What role did your time in these big architecture firms, designing shopping centers and luxury condos, play in where you are now? Do you think that was a necessary time, both for you personally and maybe making financial connections, that type of thing? Or do you wish that you'd have done this 20 years ago, or could you have done this 20 years ago?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that what I learned in that time was how to build buildings. I was doing construction documents. I was working in contexts outside of my own. So the shopping center, I always say learning about culture is because the first time I was like going into environments that were not familiar and needing to design around it. And that was a great learning for me. I needed to know the building code. Like, I can't go into communities not have technical knowledge on how buildings go together. And so all of that was happening. I was putting together construction documents and all of those things that we, working with, you know, electrical and mechanical engineers and all this stuff that we have to do. There's no way I could have done that earlier. I also needed to just get sophisticated as a professional, right? So these are very complicated conditions that we're working in. So you need to know how to manage things politically. You need to know how to manage groups of people. So that is something that comes with time and professional experience. And so everything I ever did was so rich for me. I never had a job where I wasn't really getting a lot out of it. And you saw as soon as I wasn't anymore, I quit. So, you know, I was like, as long as you're learning stuff, and there's so much to learn. I mean, there's so much to learn. I had to learn like all the basic architecture stuff, so then I could go rogue. But you can't just go rogue, or you're just going to make a mess. You will. You'll make a big mess. Go rogue after you lay the foundation, because you can hurt people. And I'm not saying I haven't hurt people. I've made some mistakes. Thank God I believe in restorative justice, so we can recover. We got to recover from that. But yes, it was very valuable. And I started my I left Columbia in 1999, and I started my practice, my first practice. I had a practice in 2011. So it was from those years that I was hardcore learning. So I would recommend that.
One last question before we go restorative retreat.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about divesting on the university level. Just last year, there was a major hunger strike at William and Mary because some of the furniture was being built by inmates.
Yeah.
So just like thinking about like we're like 18 to 22 and thinking about like how we can start. I know that you said there's so much to learn, and there is, but
But you can do that. You could totally do that. I mean, shoot. You can always raise consciousness, and that's a great thing to raise consciousness around, because you have no idea how much of the things around you are being built by incarcerated people who are earning like $1 an hour. And it sort of is the new Jim Crow, right? It is the new form of slavery. And so there's a lot of things. And you can go to universities. So this is not the first time this has happened. People have been going to universities saying divest, from apartheid, right? So there's a lot of times where university were investing in that, right? And so there was a generation of people who were like, you need to divest from that. And they were protesting. So I think it's great. So always do that if you have the time. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
I invite you all to celebrate the amazing work that our young designers and our awesome partners at FAR have done. And the design market is right outside, right next to the food.
I'm sorry, you had a question?